Hi folks, hope you're okay. It's good to see you. We're looking at the historical reliability of the Old Testament. We're looking at this book, Josh McDowell, and we're looking at quantity of manuscripts. We looked at the quality of manuscripts, now we're looking at the quality. Even though the Old Testament does not boast of the same quantity of manuscripts, MS, as the New Testament, the number of manuscripts available today is quite remarkable. Several reasons have been suggested for the scarcity of early Hebrew manuscripts. The first and most obvious reason is combination of antiquity and destructibility. 2,000 to 3,000 years is a long time to expect any document to last. Nonetheless, several lines of evidence support the conclusion that their quality is very good. First, it's important to establish the quantity of manuscripts available. There are several important collections of Hebrew manuscripts today. The first collection of Hebrew manuscripts, made by Benjamin Kennicott in 1776 to 1780 excuse me, and published by Oxford, listed 615 manuscripts of the Old Testament. Later, Giovanni de Rossi 1784 to 1788 published a list of 731 manuscripts. The most important manuscripts discoveries in modern times are those of the Cairo Geniza 1890s and the Dead Sea Scrolls 1947 excuse me, and the following years. The Cairo Synagogue attic in Geniza, or storehouse for old manuscripts, was discovered. 200,000 manuscripts and fragments, and some 10,000 of which are biblical. One scholar writes, near the end of the 19th century, many fragments from the 6th to 8th centuries were found in an old synagogue in Cairo, Egypt, which had been St. Michael's Church until AD 882. They were found there in Geniza, a storage room where worn or faulty manuscripts were hidden until they could be disposed of properly. This Geniza had apparently been walled off and forgotten until its recent discovery. In this small room, as many as 200 fragments were preserved, including biblical texts in Hebrew and Aramaic. The biblical fragments date from the 5th century AD. Wow. Of the manuscripts found in the Cairo Geniza, about one half are now housed at Cambridge University. The rest are scattered throughout the world. Cairo Geniza's authority, Paul Kale, has identified more than 120 rare manuscripts prepared by the Babylonian group of Masoretic scribes. The largest collection of Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts in the world is in the second Furkowicz collection in Leningrad. It contains 1,582 items of the Bible and Masorati, the Masorah on parchment, 725 on paper, plus 1,200 additional Hebrew manuscript fragments in the Antonin collection. Kale, the scholar, contends also that these Antonin collection manuscripts and fragments are all from Cairo Geniza. In the Furkowicz collection are found 14 Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts from between the year AD 1929 and AD 1121 that originated in the Cairo Geniza, 1121 AD. Cairo Geniza, or Geniza, manuscripts are scattered all over the world. Some of the better ones in the United States are in NLO Memorial Collection at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. The British Museum Catalogue lists 161 Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts at Oxford University. The Bodleian Library catalogues lists 146 Old Testament manuscripts, each containing a large number of fragments. Gotterson estimates that in the United States alone there are tens of thousands of Semitic manuscript fragments, about 5% of which are biblical, more than 500 manuscripts. The most significant Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts date between the 3rd century BC and the 4th century AD. Of these, the most remarkable manuscripts are those of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date from the 3rd century. BC to the 1st century AD. They include one complete Old Testament book, Isaiah, and thousands of fragments which together represent every Old Testament book except Esther. See the section called the Dead Sea Scrolls in Geisler's book. The Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts are highly significant because they confirm the accuracy of other manuscripts dated so later. For example, the Cairo Codex of AD 895 is the earlier Masorati manuscript prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls discoveries. It is now located in the British Museum. Also called Codex Cairnensis, it was produced by the Masoretic Moses ben Asher family and contains both the later and former prophets. The rest of the Old Testament is missing from it. Codex of Prophets of Leningrad, AD 916, contains Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. The earliest complete MS of the Old Testament in the Codex Babylonica Petro-Platonos, AD 108, located in Leningrad. It was prepared from a corrected text of Rabbi Aaron ben Moses ben Asher before AD 100. Aleppo Codex 900 is an exceptionally valuable manuscript. It was once thought lost, but in 1958 was rediscovered. It did not, however, escape damage. It was partially destroyed in the 1947 riots in Israel. Aleppo Codex was the oldest complete Masoretic manuscript of the entire Old Testament. British Museum Codex, AD 950, contains parts of Genesis through Deuteronomy. The Ruchelin Codex of the AD 1105, this text was prepared by the Masorati ben Naphtali. This brings up the question of the faithfulness of the transmission of the Bible text. There are numerous types of manuscript errors which the textual critics may discover in the early manuscripts of the Old Testament. These will be discussed in a later section of chapter 4. Are these of so serious a nature as to corrupt the message itself, or to make it impossible to convey the true meaning? If they are, then God's purpose has been frustrated. He could not convey his revelation. If he did not exercise a restraining influence over the scribes who wrote out the standard and authoritative copies of the scriptures, then they corrupted and falsified the message. If the message was falsified, the whole purpose of bestowing a written revelation has become to nothing. For such a corruption, scripture would be a mixture of truth and error, necessarily subject to human judgment rather than sitting in judgment. So, the chances of the corruptions coming in the text, this is what F. F. Bruce says about the text, about the Masoretes who translated the Old Testament. The Masoretes were well disciplined and treated the text with the greatest imaginable reverence, and devised a completed system of safeguard against scribal slips. They counted, for example, the number of times each letter of the alphabet occurs in each book. They pointed out the middle letter of the Pentateuch and the middle letter of the whole Hebrew Bible, and made even more detailed calculations than these. Everything countable seems to be counted, says Wheeler Robinson, and they made up mnemonics by which the various totals might be readily remembered. F. F. Bruce, an eminent scholar. So the point what we get here is basically, if you look at like how many copies do we have of Homer, how many ancient copies do we have of Tacitus, I think we have hundreds of copies of Homer, we have a handful of copies of Tacitus. Here we're talking thousands of copies of the Old Testament, which shows you that the fact that these have been preserved shows you that this text was seen as very, very important, and because of that importance, it was respected and it was passed on from generation to generation in a faithful way, and we're going to see that in more detail as we go on.